of ground to cover, and there will be some fun editing tricks in the end that I'd like to have some time left over for. Um, Not that this is going to be a big part of the presentation, but I've been very curious as I'm preparing this session over the last couple of weeks, just sort of what the general music theory knowledge is out there in the world. If I were to talk about like musical intervals, like, what notes that folks know, like if I said, you're trying to make a music transition and this piece of music is separated by a musical fifth from this piece of music. How many people feel like that level of music theory is in your skill range? Just raise your hands if like note intervals and things like that are kind of in your world. Yeah, so almost half of you. Okay. I'm just curious. The reason I'm asking, my background is actually music composition. My degree is a composition degree, and I'm a composer by training. And so I go into not only soundtracks, but kind of Starry Night and shows in general, kind of more from a musical composition standpoint. But as a result, I tend to assume, everybody speaks music theory. So I just wanted to see what the theory knowledge is. The point of this session is not everybody uses music behind your shows. Not everybody needs to, and I'm not arguing that every program ought to have music behind it. But if you are using music behind your show, I think there are some practices and some options for where you find those music, and in particular, some tricks to editing the music that might make your life a little easier. Um, One thing that I do notice, not necessarily with live shows, but with ATM4 shows, is that music seems to be, sometimes it's the orphan stepchild of the program. One will sort of put their whole show together and at the end say, gee, I've got a lot of visuals here and I need some kind of music bed. And then we look and we find something, and whatever kind of works becomes the music. Creating a soundtrack, music that really fits the theme of your visuals can be a lot of work, but I want to share some things that you can do to make that a little bit easier. So I'd like to start with the idea of where you find music in the first place. Um, if you go online and you Google stock music or library music, you'll be immediately overwhelmed with dozens, maybe hundreds of options. And so I want to just break this down in terms of what you can do. Let me share my screen here. I'm going to make sure I'm sharing my audio too, in case I decide to play some of these things. Um, Basically, stock music sites fall into a couple of categories. There are stock music sites that um, allow you to download a single piece of music, pay a one-time license for it, and you get that piece of music usually indefinitely. One that I've used for that, if you're just looking for one piece of music, is Audio Sparks. It's Audio Sparx, and that's in the course notes. Another one is Sound Vault. Sound Vault. What's interesting about them is it's really nice to be able to grab one piece of music and pay for it. It can be expensive. If any of you have seen the kind of the sizzle video I put together years ago, it's like a 5-minute online video that tours you through Starry Night. I think that one piece of music cost about $500, but it's professionally composed. It's got the sound that I was looking for. So if you want to buy one, prepare to pay a little money for it, but they're useful. More recently, I've been using websites like the one that's on my screen here. This one's called Extreme Music. Another one in this category is Premium Beat, and there are several others too. These are music services that you join, and then you can browse the site and find as many pieces as you like, load as many versions as you like. And they can be expensive. Sometimes you have to buy a 6-month license or a 1-year license. You might end up spending $500, $600, $800 for that year. But there's one advantage to them, and that's because they do so much business. Extreme Music is pretty popular. There are composers like Hans Zimmer and, like real Hollywood composers who are uploading their music to these sites. And occasionally what a movie will do when somebody really big is hired to do a soundtrack, Sometimes the movie will release the rights for redistribution. So if you hear this spectacular piece of music in a Hollywood movie, that doesn't mean it's not necessarily available. It might be available to you because that movie saved a little bit of money on the soundtrack by allowing it to be licensed later, if that makes sense. So you can get incredibly high quality music from a site like this. I use Extreme Music only because Evans and Sutherland has a license to Extreme Music. So I can log on, I can get whatever I want. One thing that you want to look out for is that term royalty free. I can promise you, and those of you who have gone to look for stock music or stock photography for that matter, you almost always see the term royalty free stock images or royalty free stock photography. As soon as I see that, I'm always tempted to click and think, oh, here's free stuff. Royalty free does not mean that the music is free. What royalty free usually means is once you've paid for it and downloaded it, within that category that you licensed it for, you don't have to pay regular royalty payments. You don't have to pay ASCAP payments. You don't have to pay BMI payments. Once you've paid for it, the artist or the publisher has released you from being responsible from paying them a lot of extra payments. So couple of other thoughts about payment as well. When you do your Google search, you might want to look to see if the royalty applies to one-time use versus multiple use. One-time use really means you can use it in this one show, but then you're done. You can't use it again. And you could get into trouble if you use it in a show, but then maybe you do a radio promotion or something where you use the music. They're probably not going to find out, but it may be a single-use thing. The royalties might also be scaled by whether you're charging admission for the program or not charging admission. Some licenses are much, much lower. You pay a lot less if you're not going to make money from it yourself. So if you're just doing this for school shows or you're doing it for a one-time event where the audience comes in for free, you may get a lower license because you're not making money from it. So pay attention to your license as to whether it's free or paid. And then a limited number of these sites also have provisions for educational use. So if you were to do a Google search for stock music educational licensing or stock music teaching use or something like that, you may find that you can use it for free or you get a lower rate if it's for educational use. Do these publishers ever drop into planetariums and check to see whether you're using it right? No, of course not. I don't think it happens. But you know, the ASCAP and BMI people can be kind of aggressive. I've had ASCAP and BMI visit me back in the laser show days to see if we had the rights to use the music. So don't assume you're perfectly safe. The more popular your planetarium is, the more you're on the radar for you know, ASCAP and BMI. So before I move on, does anyone have any questions just about where you get the music or licensing? Okay. Before I get into the actual selections, I do want to share some impressions I've had about how soundtracks are used and the choices that people make. I can tell you that one of the easiest ways, one of the simplest ways to get a soundtrack into your show is to find kind of I don't know, maybe it's a generic piece of music or it has kind of a spacey sound. And then you just keep using that throughout the show over and over again. It's convenient. It's a nice way to do it, but a lot of your audience is going to find that a little lazy. And I don't mean lazy from your workflow. I mean, you know, we are so conditioned to television and advertising and movies where every single little bit of the program or the visuals that you're seeing have a musical theme to go with them. So if you find a 5-minute generic piece of music and you loop it over and over again, that's not a terrible thing. But if one moment you're pointing out constellations and another moment you're flying dramatically up to Jupiter, and the music is the same for each, you're essentially telling your audience, well, I think this all looks the same, right? So again, these are your shows and your soundtracks, but I recommend budgeting a few extra days in the show cycle to find pieces of music that really imply what's going on visually, and taking a little time to edit the music to get your show to sound like it looks. One of the coolest expressions I heard, I used to know a guy who was a lighting guy, And he used to say, it's not how the music sounds, it's how it looks like it sounds, because he was providing the lighting, right? But I would turn that around too. I would say, it's not always how it looks, it's how it sounds like it looks, right? So good music can really enhance your visuals a lot. Um, Another thing I want to point out, and this is a little less obvious, a lot of times, there are some pieces of classical music that we like a lot, or, we really thought it was cool that, Ravel's Bolero was used as the backing track for this movie or whatever. One thing that I would suggest, it's not a hard, fast rule that you not use very, very popular or very classic music, but be careful. The one thing that you would do if you decided to choose Somewhere Over the Rainbow or 1812 Overture or something like that, it's not necessarily that the music is bad or that it's even going to seem odd. Just don't forget that people bring their own opinions to music that they already know, right? It's very possible if you thought that the 1812 Overture was a really good ending for your show, half the audience, all they're seeing in their head is the end scene of Caddyshack where Bill Murray is trying to blow up a gopher, right? We have an association with some music. And so just think twice if you pick something that's very, very renowned or well known, because your audience is going to bring their own opinion into that music selection, and they're already going to have a sense of it. Whereas if you find similar or powerful pieces of music or evocative pieces of music that nobody's heard before, you'll get credit for doing something that sounds really great, but nobody's going, oh, that's that dumb scene from that movie I saw back in the 1970s. So, another thing I would recommend is choose your genres carefully too. I have noticed that, occasionally you'll notice, hey, that show was produced by a planetarium that's in Florida, or that's a planetarium in Alabama. And lo and behold, all the music is Southern rock or country or something like that. I probably don't have to tell the group, but just because you like a genre of music doesn't mean that everybody likes that genre of music. And honestly, I think it can be a little bit selfish if somebody says, boy, I really, really like this artist's version of folk music. She's always resonated with me. I love that banjo and that mandolin on the background. Just because it's your favorite music doesn't necessarily mean that the audience taking it in is going to give you credit for exposing them to something cool. That like is not that it's possible they'll be kind of annoyed by your music selection. If you talk to composers or if you know the composition world for music, there is a genre of music in the movie industry world called timeless music. There are composers who, if you look on like extreme music, you'll see this is in the timeless category. And that is your background music for Castaway or for, the slow music behind Star Wars or whatever. It's a piece of music that would have sounded just as strong in the 70s that sounds good now. So you want to be thinking timeless as you do this, okay? So now I want to get to more of the interesting part here. Let's talk about these music libraries. One of the things that I find really cool about a good music library like Extreme Music is, and I'm sorry, I'll tweak my volume here in a second, but I'm just going to play some piece of music. This is one of the great things about music libraries. You can search by, if you go in and do a search, you can go by mood, by instrument, by tempo, by style, all kinds of things. And one of the great searches, if you put in like soundtrack or movie soundtrack or something like that, you're going to get those really great pieces that sound like they belong in a movie. I was working on a demo, so I grabbed a few. So let's see, am I playing something here? Everybody hearing what's going on?
Yes.
But here's the great thing about that. Oftentimes you'll get a whole bunch of different tracks. So you might have one with strings, or you might have one that's just percussion, or you might have one that's light. And one of the ones that's always very useful, I love these ambients. These are really useful because they tend to be these long, very gentle droning things. And if you're looking for, the powerful rhythmic music when you're flying over the planet, but as you're flying into it or something, you want the real soft droning thing. By downloading this one piece of music or finding this one piece of music, you might get an orchestral one, an electronic one, a really light and gentle one that's nothing but drums and percussion. So that's the other great thing about a music library is even though this piece of music is only 2 minutes long, if you download it, you may be getting 15 minutes of different grooves and vibes and things. That gives you that consistency, but at one point it's just kind of the electronic part of it, another point it's the strings part of it. So that's a really great use of library music. And you'll find for almost all of these, you're going to see multiple versions of things. Like literally, this one's got like 5 tracks to play with. And sometimes they even give you what they call pads or patches. They'll just give you a cymbal crash and they'll just give you like a piano note and they'll just give you like the timpani, the kettle drum being played over and over again. You can really pick these apart and almost compose your own music with what we call pads. So any other questions about music libraries, where you find music, anything? All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit for the rest of the session about, what we do with the music and how we edit things in order to get the most out of the music that you download. So I'm going to move over to Audacity. I certainly understand that Audacity is not the only music editing program out there. If anybody uses something else like, Adobe Premiere or Final Cut or something like that for audio editing, more power to you. That's great. I use Audacity because it's free. It's what I learned on. As you guys know, when Steve teaches audio editing, he uses Audacity. I don't know if anybody else has had a different experience, but I find Audacity phenomenal. It's easy to use. It's pretty powerful. The results are good. And frankly, it's really easy to learn. It's just one of the few programs that I've gone into with virtually no tutorial or anything, just kind of learned my way around in Audacity. So since I don't have everybody on the screen now, show of hands on the group. How many of you are Audacity users? Show of hands, or have used Audacity in the past? Not a ton of you. That's interesting. Okay. I am not going to teach you how to use Audacity specifically, although I'm going to go through this very slowly. So if you have questions or you want to know how to do this, I'll cover a few of the basics. But mostly I want to talk about how you make the choices musically and what sounds good rather than the technical about how to use Audacity. So I want to start with just a really simple concept here, and that's one of the things that I do find a little bit frustrating about library music is that while I'll often find a piece of music that's absolutely perfect, it's just the thing I'm looking for, you'll notice that the lengths are often really short. Like, here's a great piece of music that I found that I like a lot. Love this piece of music. But it's a whopping 3 minutes long. And I will occasionally build demos where I want the music happening behind my demo for like 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. So, a 3-minute piece of music doesn't get me very much. So one of the very first things that you'll find yourself wanting to do is taking a short piece of music and extending it, right? And that's not all that difficult, really. I believe this is the same piece of music. That if I solo this one, when I get to the end of this guy, in the case of this one, it just kind of dies out, I think. There's not, well, it looks like I've edited it, but it's still a short piece of music. So one of the things that you want to familiarize yourself with is how to get a piece of music to be longer. And so what I've done is I've just taken that chunk of music, I've made a new track in Audacity, and then I've just layered it on top of basically crossfaded into the other one. So just so you guys know what's going on technically, what I did was I opened this file. I opened the Naked Truth. And then the first thing that you want to do, if you want to take that piece of music and extend it, is you want another track of music. This is a little like ATM4. I have a track of music here, and I have a track of music down here. And so when you're in Audacity, if you've got one piece of music open and you want to do some layering or addition, what you do in Audacity is you go into the tracks menu, tracks, and you say add new, and you usually choose a stereo track. Almost all of these are stereo. So the first thing you're going to want to do in Audacity to do some layering is tracks, add new, and stereo track. And you can see I've added multiple tracks here. I've got about 5 tracks going here. But the first thing I did to make this happen is I just grabbed this piece of music from the beginning. And what I'm going to do here is just zoom a little bit. Audacity has a couple of handy tools for sort of grabbing and manipulating things. Why won't you let me? That's why. So one thing I can do in Audacity is if you have this little, it looks like a little straight up and down vertical cursor, that allows you to grab an entire section. If I just drag that over something, then if I hit copy, Control C, and I go somewhere else on my timeline and I say paste, Control V, then I've just duplicated that thing. Now I'm going to undo. What I did in this case is I duplicated that thing down here. I just grabbed basically the whole piece of music and I put it there. The question is though, am I lined up well, right? And one really nice trick for lining things up is oftentimes music with any percussion in it, you can see the beats really well. If I play this piece of music, I can see that there's a beat here lining up with a beat here. So visuals in lining up music can be really useful, but that doesn't help you if you're in the right beat, right? This music has got 4 beats per minute, right? It's going 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it repeats 1, 2, 3, 4. So I want those beats to line up, right? So I'm just going to listen to this one first. And that point right here, if you were paying attention visually, when it hits that point, it sounds like I hit the beginning of a new section. Listen to this. It sure sounds to me like that's a really big new part, right? That's a new phrase there. So I want to line the phrases up here. I want to make sure that this one matches. So if I'm not lined up, if I'm a little off like this, you know, sometimes it just sounds like cacophony. So the first thing I'll do is I'll take these really obvious looking points. I'm going to use this little side to side grabber tool, and I'll line something up that looks like it might be sort of a main beat in the music. And this is just a trial and error process, folks. You just, you know, sometimes I'll line up there and see if that works. And the one thing you've got to do is kind of listen back and forth and make sure they line up. And then once you do have the beats lined up, it should sound pretty good, right? And I think the right one is, I believe right here, if we listen to it, is going to be the right one. Let's take a listen. So another thing to keep in mind, what you'll notice, and this is so obvious, I think even the first time you did this, this would be intuitive. You kind of want to fade one in, right? And then eventually you want to fade one out. If you try to do a hard cut from one piece of music to another, you know, the style is going to change or whatever. And so it's a good idea to do a little overlap like this. And let me show you the tool for doing that. It's really, really handy. Let's just pretend for the sake of argument that I had just a hard section here. I'm going to just silence, where is that little tool? I'm just going to silence that bit. So you've got a little hard cut. What you do to do a fade in is if you use this little vertical tool again, you grab this section, however long you want it to be. If you go into your effect menu, effect, fade in, then what you get is a nice little ramp up, okay? And the same thing over here. If I go to this section and I say effect, fade out, unless the two pieces of music are dramatically different, unless one is super loud compared to the other one, you're never going to notice the crossfade, especially. Okay. So crossfades are a really useful thing. And what you end up with here, though, if I'm going to zoom out a little bit, what you've ended up with here is a piece of music here that's identical to this piece of music here. And I find that boring. Basically, what we've done is just looped back to the beginning, and now it's twice as long. I want to turn this piece of music into something that has a little bit more variety. Let me get rid of this track down here and this track down here for a second. So this is a really cool thing about library music. This is one of the most interesting things I've discovered when I go to libraries and grab music is composers like this are kind of lazy, especially when they're working in the electronic realm like this. Pretend I'm a composer and I first set up like the drums and the background chords, and then I layer in some piano. When I get 32 bars in or 64 bars in, I don't want to start rewriting at 32 bars. It's so much easier if I keep those drums going and those chords going, and then I stick some strings on it, and then I stick some piano on it. The beauty of that is if you were to take something like Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart, even if the chords at the beginning were matched the chords near the end, the notes in the music wouldn't, right? Like you would hear a C played against a D played against an E flat as the melody went along. You couldn't just paste one part of Mozart on top of another part of Mozart. But with library music, often because it's electronic, the composers are layering as they go. Why do I say that? Basically, with music like this, if I grab any 8 bars and line it up with any other 8 bars in the music, they're going to match beautifully. I can grab almost any part of the music here, layer it on top of another part of music, and you're not going to hear any dissonance. So let's say back here, early in the music, there's a little section that I like. Let me go right here. Okay, so that's like a little 8 or 16 bar section of the music. Here's a neat trick in Audacity. If you highlight a section, Audacity will only play that selection. So if I just want to see how long my... So right here is the end of that section. I'm just going to grab this whole thing and paste it on top of a completely different part of the music. And if my theory is right, even though they're completely separate parts of the music, they're going to layer very nicely. Now, remember, it's a good idea to crossfade in and crossfade out. So what I'm going to do, I'll zoom in a little bit. I want to grab a little, let's see, where's my selection? Oh, I unselected. Sorry about that, guys. I'm going to grab a little extra, a little more than I need here, because I want to crossfade in and crossfade out. I'm going to copy that and go down here and find a completely different section of this music. Maybe it's right where this one picks up here. Let's see, I'll listen to it and see. Yeah, I think I'm going to paste it in like right there. You know what? That's going to get complicated because I'm overlapping. Let's just go down to find another section here. Okay, so right there, it sounds like I'm coming to the beginning of a new section, like right here. Then I'm going to do that trick that we did before. It sure looks to me, here's a sort of a big beat here, and there's sort of a big one right there. It looks like those would line up pretty nicely. So I'm going to play from right there and just see if that lineup worked. So it sounds like they're lined up pretty well. And now I've just made something that's a little more intricate than what we had before. Now I want to do a little crossfade in, so I go to Effects, Fade in. And here's a little trick I want to teach you guys too. And this will help you if you've ever had this problem. Every once in a while, what'll happen is you really like what it sounds like right here. This sounds good to you, but right before it, it sounds wrong. It's the wrong chord, or it's too intense or whatever. I'm going to undo what I did. One really nice trick, if you don't like this bit right here, you can do like an effect fade in, and you can very carefully select this. But if this part doesn't sound good to you, what I'll do is effect, fade in, and then I'll repeat it a few times. I'll just hit Control R. That's repeat the effect you just did. Watch what happens if I do Control R a few times. Oh, sorry. Got to select it. Every time you hit Control R, it makes the fade in a little bit shorter and a little closer to the point. So many times, this is a habit I've gotten into, is once I hit fade in, if I'm like, it still sounds too loud to my ear, it still sounds too intense, just keep going, Control R, 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 and it will make that really nice sort of exponential ramp for you, rather than you having to try to build that, right? So now I've got two pieces layered, and I like that. And sometimes I'll do that throughout the piece. I'll just keep layering and layering. Sometimes I'll build three pieces. But what if that's not enough? What if it's just, still sounds sort of stock and boring? Remember that I mentioned before, you can also find drum tracks as well. What I've done down here is I've located a drum track that I like, and I've layered a drum track in. The problem is this drum track that I found is not the same tempo as the drum track that I want to paste into the music, right? So if I start playing this right here, I've added the drum track, and what I'll do is I'll drag this up here so you can see what's going on. So I've got a drum track here. But if you listen carefully, the longer it goes, the further it gets out of sync. So how the heck do you go about getting random drums to be the same tempo as the piece of music you're in? The visual will always help you, first of all. Drums, especially percussion, you usually can see the beats really, really well, right? And in my music, I can see the beats really well. Here's a phrase right here that starts, but the drums here have gotten a little ahead of the phrase, right? And if I go to another big phrase here, here's another percussive beat in my original music. See how the drums have gotten ahead? So are my drums too slow or too fast? My drums are getting ahead of my background music, right? The drums are getting further and further ahead. So they're a little bit too fast, right? Mm-hmm. So I can see visually that I want to slow this down. I want these beats, these main beats here, to slow down in order to line up with these beats here. Does that make sense? Like I can just see every 4 beats, I'm getting further and further ahead. So the drum is too fast. And the further I go down, the more obvious that gets, right? I'm pretty far out of sync here. This is a kind of a non-obvious trick for doing this. I started doing this a long time ago. Let's just say, for example, all I wanted was this little section of drums right here. See how I've got, I think it's 8 beats in a row that look really percussive. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Even though that's the section I want to work with, I pasted in way more drums than I wanted. And I did that for a reason. And I'll show you why. First of all, if I want to get the music to line up, the first thing I can do again is look at how well they're lining up visually. And I can see that this needs to be a little bit faster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my entire drum track, go all the way down to the end. Okay, so I've grabbed the whole thing. And the one thing you want to be very careful about right now is to make sure that the beginning is lined up really well. I would listen to this over and over and make sure that first beat of both sections is lining up perfectly. That's all you need to worry about at this point, is give it a bunch of listens, you know, listen 9, 10, 20 times and make sure that that beginning is lined up really well. You want that beat to hit perfectly, okay? And then once you think you're lined up, grab this entire drum track, zoom into a point, and then you're going to use an effect called change tempo. Audacity does a nice thing where you can change the pitch of something. You can slow it down so that the pitch is lower. You can change the speed of it, which slows everything down, like slowing down or speeding up a record. But you can change the tempo of it, how fast the drums are going by, without them sounding higher pitched or lower pitched. So in Audacity, when you change the tempo, just because you're changing the tempo, it doesn't mean the pitch is going to get shifted higher. It just means the whole piece of music is going to get faster and slower. It's a great effect and it's really useful. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move a little down the drum track and I'm going to find effect and I'm going to tell it to change tempo, but I'm going to choose a pretty small percent change. I'm going to change it slower by like minus let's say 0.3 or something, okay? I want a pretty small percent change, because if I change it by 50% or by 20 or whatever, it's going to get really huge or really slow, right? So I want to go a little bit faster by, say, well, there's 1. So I want to go faster by just 0.3. And then I'm going to hit OK. Whoop, it's not faster. I want to go slower. My bad. I'm surprised you guys didn't yell at me because I was going the wrong way. So,
well, I was about to, but I didn't know if that's I thought maybe you were trying to grab them.
When I'm dumb, I'm really dumb. You know, I'm not.
That's okay. I thought you're trying to like really, sorry guys, really cram a bunch of beats in there.
It's slower. So I'm going to slow it down by 0.3.
I was wondering if you were going to use the preview button.
It's not really going to help me because right now I'm doing it visually. My goal is to just try to get them lined up as closely as possible by appearance first, and then I'll start working on the way it sounds, okay? And the reason I do it this way is when I hit OK, now it's a long section of music, so it is going to take a while to do. And the good news is once it's done it once, successive decreases in tempo are actually going to be a little bit quicker. But this is going to be worth your time. I know this is a little slow, but this will definitely be worth the effort. I guess I had forgotten how long this one. Sorry, this one's it's a little longer than I intended it to be, but we'll get there. By the way, there was a checkbox in the tempo. If you go very slow, if you go from extremely fast to extremely slow, those of you who have ever done this, you'll notice that if you slow it down a lot, it develops this kind of grainy sound. It starts to develop these little beats. There was a box that you could check called use high quality. And what that does is it actually improves that thing where it sounds a little grainy or gritty when you do it. Okay, so I just moved it by a little bit. And all I do at this point is I just hit Control R. And I keep hitting Control R over and over again until they look visually lined up. And you can see that once I discovered how long it took on the first one, I could have made my second one a little longer, or I can now make my third one a little longer. It's when you start getting into the little tiny variations that you want to go to a small number and just keep hitting repeat over and over again. This is how you want to do it, rather than sort of, you don't want to slide it left, change it, slide it right, change it. You always want to work with the beginning synced up. And then literally all you have to do is just keep hitting Control R, Control R, Control R, okay? So it looks like I could go a little more than that. So let's do it again. Let's go Effect, change tempo, and let's change that for now to 0.6, and let's see where that gets us.
So you might want to, just for the lesson, unclick the high definition one.
Oh, will it do it a lot faster? Yeah, that's
yeah.
a good
point, it'll do that thing you said before, but it'll go way faster than this.
Yeah, you know what? That's a good point, because I'm changing it so little. We probably don't need the high definition.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. That will be a big time saver. The group will thank you for not going.
I mean, yeah, you could have probably hit it 10 times in the time you've done this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to demonstrate the high quality, but I didn't intend to do it every time. Thank you.
Oh, I agree.
And once this one is done, the one other trick I want to show you guys, and I'll get off of the drum thing here, is, do you remember when we first looked at the music, after the first 4 beats, they were pretty close, right? After 16 beats, they were starting to get far away. So if I want to get them really perfect, what I really want to do is go very far down toward the end, right? Because the further down the script I get, the more far apart they're going to be. So now I'm going to use Dan's suggestion. Let's go back to Effect, change tempo, and let's not use the high quality stretching. And I'm going to bring my number back down to maybe 0.2. And this is where I really start listening carefully, okay? And I'm going to put my time bar down here somewhere. Now I do have to reselect all this now that I've done that. One other thing that I recommend you do when you do your selection, when you do a tempo change, let's say I selected half the music, and then I went and did a tempo change and I selected all of the music, it's going to change them at different rates. And Audacity does a thing that makes that a little easier for you. What you want to do, if you unselected and reselected, is you want to make sure you select the same amount of music every time. And there's a little detent here. What I made sure I did when I selected it, I made sure I caught the very beginning and the very end of my music. See how it kind of sticks there? So when you do a selection, don't select here, or the rate's going to change. Make sure you select the same amount every time. So I'm going to move my time bar down to about here. I'm going to select the same amount of music that I selected before. That's important. And I'm going to zoom in to somewhere near the end here where I've selected. And I'm just going to keep playing. And Control R. Whoop, sorry. Sorry, guys. See how when I hit Control R, it just moved everything? There we go. Eventually, and I'm not going to go through the process. Eventually, you're going to get to the point where from beginning to end, it's going to be perfectly in sync. And what you want to do is keep going to near the end and listen. Change it, go to the end and listen, change it, go to the end and listen. At some point, you're going to be all lined up, okay? All right. So I'm going to switch over to a different piece of music and change topics here. There's one other that I want to share with you here. All right. So one of the things that we find ourselves having to do is change from a piece of music to another piece of music. Let's see. So let me just drag this out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. So what I'm doing here is I've got a piece of music that I really like here. Kind of a peppy up-tempo piece of music, but I want to transition that into a much bigger, more orchestral, sort of much more heroic sounding piece of music. How do I get from one to the other, right? One of my favorite tricks is using what I call a drone. And if you look in library music, oftentimes you'll see a version of the music that's either ambient or it's called a drone. And a drone sounds like this. It's a part of that piece of music, but it has this sound. And what I'll do is I'll take the drone from this piece of music and the drone from this piece of music and just layer them over each other. What if each of them doesn't have a drone? You can take this drone right here and you can just copy it down here and use the change pitch to change it into a drone in the other musical key. So if you listen to what I do, I just have a drone in one key and a drone in the other key, and I just crossfade from one to the other. So listen to the crossfade. Now, here's another problem, and I encounter this a lot too. This piano is as gentle as it gets, but this piece of music takes a long time to ramp up. I've got a part of my show here where I just want to be balls to the wall big. And I want to transition between the two of them, but I don't want it to sound too abrupt, right? So I'm going to mute this. I'm not looking for this. That's too powerful. That's way too intense a transition, right? So one trick that I did was just to add kind of one that was in between. I found some music that was neither loud nor soft, and that helps a little bit. But I still got a couple of problems. One of them that I really don't like is the chord right before this fades in doesn't really work with this other thing. So here's one of my favorite tricks. If you go online and you do a Google search for timpani roll or timpani, you'll find hundreds of these.
Your time's almost up. Your time's almost up.
Okay. Timpani roll is basically shorthand for I can cover up anything. You put a timpani roll in at the transition between two pieces of music, and that timpani roll hides hundreds of problems. You know that little chord right before the big part that I didn't like? Listen to this now. All right, let me go a little further in here. Timpani rolls are your friend. You can find hundreds of them online. They'll be free. Just put in timpaniroll.wave, and now you have every music, the solution to every musical transition. All right. So those are just a few tricks. I think I've got a couple of others in the course notes. These are all covered in the course notes, but library music is your friend. Look for the music that has lots and lots of different versions of it. And then you've got all kinds of cut and paste options. And drones are great. Drones are ambient, just solve all kinds of problems. And if none of it works, go get yourself a timpani roll and you can cover up the worst crap possible. So I hope a little of that was useful. I hope you got something out of it. And it looks like we're out of time. Thanks.